They get up there and then they soft greens. Yeah, he did.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mary Beth Hunt, and I'm the president of Chief Mahaska Equestrians Chapter 505, which has been continually active in Oskaloosa since 1971. In fact, two of our founding members, Betty Stanley and Jean Saxton, wave Jean, are still in our chapter today. We are affiliated with both the International and Iowa Equesters. Our mission statement is to keep history alive by supporting preservation, restoration, and education. Over the years, we have sponsored and supported diverse projects and events in Iowa, Mahaska County, and Oskaloosa. Earlier this year, we decided that we would like to host this Montage Memories event to educate the public on the Montage and film our speakers for posterity. Our first speaker is Joe Crookham, president and principal owner of Musco Lighting. Joe is an Oskaloosa native who has always been interested in our city's history and involved with many heritage projects for the betterment of our community and education of our citizens. Joe is going to share his involvement and memories connected with the Montage. Joe?
Thank you. Yes, I kind of thought we'd have a discussion. You're going to want to introduce the other two.
I was going to let you speak and then, but we can do whatever you would like.
Okay, if you want to specifically introduce them, that we thought maybe we just chat a little bit here. So.
Oh, okay, we can do it that way. Then I was going to say, thank you, Joe.
That's the shortest talk you've ever given.
And Deb thinks it's the best.
Our next speaker is local artist Tom Stone. Tom and Marv Smith, well known for their creative abilities, designed and built a three-dimensional model of the wall in their sign shop to develop a Montage model using miniatures. They then used that model to construct this large display. Tom is going to tell us about this process. Thank you, Tom. Our next speaker is Emily Russell. Emily was born in 1923 and has lived in Oskaloosa her entire life except during her college years in World War II. She married the late Chuck Russell in 1945 and they raised 3 children. Chuck had an independent insurance agency and abstract business, but his passion was local history. He took many photos of people and places and collected old photos and things. When the montage was in progress, Chuck was fascinated by what Tom and Marv were accomplishing and donated many of the items contained in it. About half the pictures are his. One of our Quester members recently referred to Emily as an Oskaloosa treasure, so we are delighted to have her here today to share some thoughts and memories. So, John, you're going to be introduced separately, or you're going to be on this panel?
Go ahead.
Okay.
You're on the roll.
Okay. Our last speaker is John Jacobs. John is the president of the Mahaska County Historical Society, chairman of the Mahaska Pioneer Cemetery Commission, president of the Ottumwa Civil War Roundtable, and a consultant for the Historical Building Marker Project. He is going to share some thoughts and items related to the montage.
Thank you. It's 34 years ago that looked at this wall when it was a block wall being laid up for the construction of the Cernet department store. And the thought occurred to me that it was a large space, it wouldn't look very good just being blank, and it'd be interesting to do something with it that people could enjoy and appreciate. So the challenge at that point in time was to think about, who do I know that's got talent, and who do I know that's gullible? And so I immediately went down and talked to Marv Smith and Tom Stone and said, I got an interesting thing you might want to come take a look at. They're doing this construction project up here. And sure enough, they got drawn right into it. And I do have to say that Marv Smith was a man of just tremendous talent when it comes to architecture, visual imagery, or putting things together, and this montage is a big testament to how good he is at what he does. We have the George Daly, we have the monument at the auditorium that also comments on how talented Marvin was. He was the sculptor that created that also. The goal for this, as I saw it and see it today, is to create understanding and appreciation of what we have as a community. And that requires a lot of work to try to go through and determine what do our ancestors do, how did they create this community we have, what are the important things that we need to remember about it so we learn from all what they did as they made this come forward. And I believe what was created here has done that very, very successfully. I'll let Tom here in just a moment or two get in to defend his side of it. The challenge was to cause people to understand and to appreciate. And we made a couple of trips to try to get some idea of how other people have done this, and then tried to look around and find out where do we go to find the things we need. And Emily is sitting up here defending a barn that's much emptier than it would have otherwise been had Tom not gotten out there. We were just discussing it a little bit earlier while we were sitting up here, that Marvin, or that Tom would talk to Chuck about things that were there, and then Chuck would go out to try to make sure they didn't take more than they should. And I can remember some conversations where Tom would mention to me, what did we get away with one last night that Chuck doesn't know about? But Chet got to see it all after it was in here. Whether he fully agreed with putting it in the unit or not, he was very, very supportive of the whole thing all the way through. So, Emily or John, which one wants to?
I can talk
Yeah,
about
when Joe finally talked us into doing something with the wall, at first it was art. Marvin was the artist. I was just a tinker. Marvin had great abilities as far as artistry and I tinkered with stuff. I would take stuff, his ideas and dreams and all that, and we'd build them. So that's what we did. We went back there and we talked about doing different murals and all that. And then as they were tearing all the buildings down that were here, they were saving a lot of the building caps and different things. A couple of the building caps, the one from the library is a copy. We copied that, and the Frankel block, because those buildings are still up. The rest of them were, we got them from the what they salvaged. They weren't in good shape, and we restored them and hung them back. And the other things in here that were restored, got donations for a lot of the stuff, and then borrowed stuff from Chuck's barn. The pedestal lights in the corners, we got those from City Hall, and wound up buying the new pedestal lights for City Hall if we could have the old ones. So they wound up with a new set of pedestal lights so we could have the old ones. Plow, we got the fire hydrant, the pigeon, we got it from one of the building tops, and then Rick Stevens is a UPS driver, and conned him into stuffing it for us. And so Clyde, he made it to the top of the building cap and stuff like that. But it was a fantastic project. Once you got started, it just grew. You couldn't stop it. We had a office up down at the sign shop, and we just built a scale model of this down right onto the wall. And one day we were going to cut it out of the wall just to have it. We never got that done. But this is it, and Emily can go over some of the items Chuck donated, whether he knew it or not.
Well, I think I will stand up. Maybe to show you some of the things that they told me to hold it like this. So I thought I would, what I would do, just show you some of the things that did come out of the barn. There's so many things here, so you can't talk about them all. So I'll just talk about a few of them that I know that did come out of the barn. I'll go down here. My, this is a big thing. This transit, I know, was Chuck's. It was belonged to Chuck's father. Chuck's father was a city engineer in the 20s and 30s, a little bit in the 40s, I think. And so that was used a lot for the city streets, and well, he did a lot of the WPA. I know, I think there's 50 miles of sidewalks and the Edmondson Park and the sewage disposal plants and all that sort of thing. So that I know was his father's. And maybe you have heard Chuck gave me, where is it? The YWCA song for my birthday. He was always doing that, things like that. And that came out of the old Y. How many people here remember the old Y that was on the, I haven't. Most of it, huh? Well, if you remember, the YWCA sign was on the side of the building. You had to go up the outside stairs to the YWCA. It was a great building. And there was, I think it was something like 1903. It was dedicated by Teddy Roosevelt. And oh, there's a picture. I think there's a picture of the old Y. Here somewhere. Down here. There it is. Right there. And this wall here. Right here. That was the ash trees that were originally planted in the city park. This was the last one that was cut down, and it was across the street from the Downing Hotel. And so Chuck had talked to the people who were cutting it down and asked for them to save a slice for him. And John Camel went through and put all those things where the dates of where those would be. So that was kind of neat, really. That came out of the barn. That was on the corner of what would be now Musco. It was Montgomery Ward and Woolworth. Remember that corner?
It's still there.
And let's see. Well, right down here, you might have a hard time seeing it. There is a brass hinge. It's a big brass hinge, and that went on the original firehouse. And Chuck got quite a few of those from Schrago's waste material yard. And that's one of them. And there's a couple more that are on the bottom right now. And let's see, there seems like there's one other thing. Well, that's about all I can think of. I think I'm missing some things, but those are some of the things that came out of the barn. And of course, as they said, about half of the pictures are Chuck's that were, I think, Jeannie, you knew somebody that had made them enlarged, didn't you? And they did such a wonderful job with the old photos, I thought. So that's about it for me.
One quick comment for you. At the time of the montage, we created a book that has a story of all the pictures in it and that sort of thing. And one of my goals would be to, and I think there are some of these available, we used it as a fundraiser to pay for this. There were some leather-bound copies that sold for.
There were leather-bound ones that were they were limited to 100 of them. They were $500 a copy. They were signed by Marvin. I think he signed all 100 of those, and then there was 500 of the ones like this, and they sold for $125. I don't know how many, if there's how many are left or where they're at or anything like that, but,
There are some of these left. One of the things I think would be of some interest would be to get some ambitious, gullible student to do a video project. We create a video display that you could go in and touch things and get and have the same information in here that you could look at things and have a touch screen to be able to tell the story. There's a lot of very interesting things in there. But I give something you want to add.
yeah, just when we put it together, we try to break it down a little bit as far as city, school, county. So it has some order to it, but yet it has enough information that you can walk through here and look at it for, as you're walking through, you can look at it for 2-3 minutes and learn something, or you can spend 15, 20 minutes or a half hour just looking at it. You'll learn something new. The corners, they're paper bricks that came out of the streets. A lot of them are on the old Oskaloosa paper bricks. We have the plankings from the Rock Island Depot down there. They came right out of that. We got schoolhouse flooring down, so we try to use something, all the stuff from different, so everything had a meaning to it, and it got taken out a number of years ago when the mall ownership went over to someone else, and there was enough pride in it that everything got taken down and it got saved. And then it got, with the fortitude and everything, it got reinstalled. It got put back up, thanks to the new mall owners. And it all got reinstalled. And so not only wasn't it built once, it was built back again. And it's all original. The only thing that got added the second time was there's 2 little figures in there now, one of Marvin and one of Chuck Russell, and they're hidden throughout the montage. And so, and this will always be that way. People have donated other stuff and said, this ought to go in the montage, or this ought to go in the montage. This is the montage. You can donate stuff. I think we have some stuff that people have brought up and they stored. Maybe someday we'll build something, put some other stuff in. But this is the original one, and that's what it'll be.
One thing I want to clarify on what Tom is saying, he said that the montage had to be taken out of here, and then it had been preserved and then put back again. And he said somebody did that. The person who personally made sure that everything was properly put away so it could be identified, and the person that put it all back together again is sitting right here. It wasn't somebody that did this. We would not have the montage today, but Tom's commitment to doing all that, and we do appreciate it. I think maybe one of my favorite things was Chuck and I were talking about that ash tree that was being cut down, and we got discussing how many rings there might be in it, and he negotiated to get that trunk from there so that we have rings for all the time, because City Square has been there, because it tells the story of it. It's very interesting. But John, you want to let you
When Ann contacted me about doing a program, I thought, oh boy, I'm going to do one on the woolen mills in Oskaloosa. Well, there's a key artifact I can't find, an 1867 lottery ticket, so that went out the window. I was going to do a story on Don McClure's auto garage. He made the race across Iowa in 1912. He was from Oskaloosa. But I was working on a third program, and I thought, I'm going to do cigars. I've been collecting cigar boxes for years. So my program today is going to be on a once thriving industry in Oskaloosa and the nation, and that was the manufacture of cigars. I'm going to focus on Dean's Cigar Store, and I think probably everybody remembers Dean's Cigar Store. I was born in '47, so I remember it. And as usual, going back in the old papers, who was first? Who was first? You find several, there's discrepancies, amazingly enough. One article said a Louis Frank was one of the first, along with Fred Beckman, and Fred opened a shop here in Oskaloosa on the south side of the square in the 1850s. His trade increased until he was manufacturing 150 to 200,000 cigars a month. His trade extended all over Iowa and into the surrounding states. This figure seems amazing, but the making of cigars was not something that had to be done in a factory. It could be done at home. And let's see, it was a way to make a little extra money for a family. Fred was later joined by his brother William, and their shop was for a long time located on South Market Street. In 1892, they employed 15 hands with a monthly output of 50,000 cigars. Louis Frank was still going in 1892. He was in partnership with Will H. Campfield, and a factory located on First Avenue West. They employed 6 hands and produced 25,000 cigars monthly. On High Avenue were found 3 large factories. The famous 47 brand of Will P. Hensley employed 35 and produced 140,000 cigars monthly. On down High Avenue was the factory of C.E. Howard, which employed 13 men and produced 35,000 cigars monthly. But more about that place later. J.W. Hetherington and Company occupied a building on High Avenue West, had a payroll of 25 men and manufactured 120,000 cigars monthly. This factory occupied both floors of the building and a basement. And looking over the list, over 100 people were employed in the trade in 1892, producing around 400,000 cigars monthly, with a payroll of approximately 6,000 a month. And at that time the article was written, that was the boom time for cigar manufacturing. So productivity and payroll is definitely going to be up next year. Here, how was a cigar made? In a book, the way it was, a book with interviews of Iowans about their memories, is this piece by Roberta Hickerson. This is her memory. Beginning about 1900, my uncle, Gus Wenzel, was a cigar maker in Oskaloosa. As a child, I spent many summers with him and his wife and loved to sit in his shop and watch him make the cigars. He actually worked for a foundry, and the cigar making was a side issue. Wearing a green eye shade, he sat at a table with a low-hanging light over it. On the table would be piles of tobacco leaves. Wearing a rubber thumb stall, he would sort the leaves, putting the best ones in a separate pile for the outside of the cigars. Using a sharp knife, he would begin a cigar by cutting a small slice from a poorer grade of tobacco leaf. Next, he dipped his fingers into a water solution, dampened the leaf, and rolled it into a small, tight tube. Then he dampened a little larger piece of leaf and rolled it around the first, tapering one end, continuing the process until he had a full-size cigar, and wrapped the last and best leaf around the outside. The dampening agent was water containing one of the following: wine, rum, sugar, honey, or licorice, depending on the flavor he wanted. When the last leaf was wrapped, he smoothed and rubbed the cigar with a bit of vegetable gum, which kept the edge of the outside leaf from curling so the cigar would not come apart. As each cigar was finished, it was laid in a grooved tray having a lid and allowed to age a while. After the aging was finished, he used a sharp knife to cut one end so the cigar would have a blunt edge. My uncle and aunt lived on the second floor of Bill Harney's cigar store. That was 207 High Avenue West. Uncle Gus used one room up there in which to make his cigars. When finished, they were packaged in a small wooden box and sold to Mr. Harney, who resold them to customers in the store. Now, Oskaloosa had a cigar makers union, number 277. And in the mid-1890s, that was a growing concern. I can't find a whole lot on cigar makers union except when they elected officers. But one article I did find, the local union took charge of the remains of J.H. Levy, a member of New Westminster Lodge number 307 of the Cigar Makers Union. He was killed in the lightning train wreck of August 1896. That killed 5 or 6 people. They were coming from Des Moines, and they were coming through. They were trying to find jobs on closer to the river, and the train derailed and killed them. The body was to be shipped back to Dakota Creek, British Columbia, Canada. The conditions made it necessary to hold the funeral in Oskaloosa, and burial was made in Forest Cemetery. They received the thanks from the parents of the 22-year-old for taking charge on this occasion. Now, the world's record for cigar makers, the first person doesn't have a chance. I found an article that he produced so many cigars. Well, another guy wrote in, Carl C. Moore of Albia claimed the record by making 4,350 in 1 week of October 1912. He worked at the Toby and Beckett factory in Albia. Now, back to Dean's Cigar Store. An article in the Oskaloosa Herald of 1950 says Dean's has been a cigar store for over 65 years. That would put it back to approximately 1885. It's September of 1888. It was the C.E. Howard Cigar Store and Factory. They opened for business. They opened in another location, but in 1891 they moved to 203 High Avenue West, which was Dean's, became Dean's. And their brand was called the Gold Medal, and that became the most popular brand for them. In 1910, they employed 25 makers. All but one were married. They made sure they put that in the article, and most of them owned their homes. The output of 1909 was 1 million cigars, and they expected to better that in 1910. It was a June 3rd, 1910 Oskaloosa Herald article that announced the sale of this property to F.E. Knowles, who would continue at the same location, and it would be known under the business name of C.E. Howard Cigar Company. Mr. Knowles later sold it to Bob McKim of Des Moines. He in turn later sold it to Floyd Dean, and that's when it became known as Dean's. He sold it to Phil Ellsworth, and later it was purchased by Bob Lukes and Frank Beach. In 1943, Beach sold his interest to Raymond Allison, and in 1949, Lukes sold to Orrin James, and as of 1950, James and Allison operated it. Now, as I say, I was born in 47, and when I was a little kid, 3 places in Oskaloosa I would go. I would go to Woolworths. They had model cars. Mom would take me across the street south to Montgomery Wharves to buy my clothes, and I would go to Dean's because they had comic books. Dean's was famous for their thin but delicious hamburgers along with exceptional malts and shakes. I only remember eating a couple of hamburgers. After all, I was after the comics. And did I buy Superman, Batman, and Spider-Man? No. I bought Sergeant Rock and Combat. Another wise business decision even then. Anyway, I do have several souvenirs up there of the cigar trade in Oskaloosa, and mostly cigar boxes. But one item, every cigar store had an Indian. And boy, it'd be nice to have that Indian. I mentioned this to my neighbor, and he tells me he thought it sold for $750 and went to Colorado. I don't know if that's true. In 1891, there is still a reminder of the cigar trade in Oskaloosa, and a lot of you go by it every day and don't realize it. In January of 1891, Dietrich Beckman proposed to build a 2-story brick building on his factory if the city would build a much-needed city hall on their property adjoining. He did, and sure enough, in 1910, 19 years later, Oskaloosa's new city hall went up. Now, the Dietrich building was last occupied by the real estate depot. Now, to give you an idea of the cigar manufacturing, and I checked the city records, 1894, 95, there were 8 factories listed. 1900 through 1911, there were varied from 10 to 11 factories. 1914, 15, there were 7. 1919, 20, there were 6. 1924, 25, there were 5. What killed the cigar trade in Oskaloosa? One name, Tampa. Everybody seemed to think they had to get the cigars in Florida, and especially Tampa cigars. So that became the big thing, and that brought an end to the production of handmade cigars in Oskaloosa. Now, in closing, there are 3 Oskaloosa brands I'm still looking for. The box label art is really something. I'm looking, they had a brand called the Major Lacy. They had a brand called the Buxton. They had a brand called the Oskaloosa. Boy, I'd like to find a cigar box so I can see what the label art was on that box. So anyway, that's, now I should backtrack. I skipped. Dean's, I've got a couple boxes up there from Dean's. And Julius Fetch from Atoma. He came to Dean's and I'll supply you with cigars. He made a business arrangement with them. He was supplying with cigars in their boxes. So that's where Dean's Cigars came from, was Julius Fetch and Atoma. And this is a picture of the real estate depot. As you can see, it's kind of adjoining the city hall. But that building went up as a cigar factory. And when I think of Dean's, this is who I think of. I think of Dean's Cigar Store. You have Ron Cruz, Mark, Larry Penland, Warren James, and I didn't know who the other guy was. They told me today that's Raymond Allison. So this is what, the 70s, I'm going to say. I remember this as. So anyway, that's my spiel. So thank you.
They brought it. I work in genealogy, and my ancestors came from Virginia, and they were in Kia County. They raised tobacco in the 1860s, but no, they got it from Florida.
And then usually farmers over around Watcher raise their own.
Oh, okay.
But I just wondered if they did that.
No, they get it from Tampa. Everybody gotta have Tampa cigars. That killed them.
Tom? Any final comments you want to make about anything? Okay. Anybody have any questions for him?
Oskaloosa population sign up there. Oskaloosa population 14,500, and it says it was from 1906.
Yeah.
Where did that come from? And that's interesting that we have the population that high at that month.
Yeah.
That's Marvin.
The,
We talked about it.
Chuck always thought that
Can you
was.
repeat the
Yeah.
question, because they're not hearing it?
Can't hear down here at all.
okay. I don't know the exact accuracy of that, but I do know from some research I've done that around the turn of the century, Oskaloosa and the state of Iowa were a good deal more prosperous and successful than we've become since then. We had at the turn of the 1900th century, we had 10 seats in the U.S. House of Representatives. We now have 4. Our proportionate role in the country has reduced by that amount since that point in time. So.
Would that have been reflective of the mining industry?
Oh, I don't know that I have any great insight into what it was. There are some interesting tidbits I found about things in the city council meeting somewhere around 1905, 1906, something like that. When I was city attorney, I ran across some notes that at a city council meeting, they changed the names of all the streets in Oskaloosa from individualized names to A, B, C avenues and 1, 2, 3. I can't imagine what that council meeting might have been like.
The repercussions of it.
But there were a lot of things being done to change a lot of things of that sort. So I really don't know, but I do know that we had a big push at one point in time, and then our population started dropping significantly compared to the rest of the country.
Well, farming became industrialized at that point. Before that, you didn't have the automated machines and things like that, so the kids had to stay home to help with the farms and in town here and stuff, and studying that. So now, you know, 2 people with a couple of machines can run a 1,500 acre farm.
What's the second person do?
Yeah, exactly. Help fix it when it breaks.
I've been a lot of change to that. Any other questions about this? It's been a tremendously interesting project where we were putting together 30-some years ago, and I'm very appreciative of Tom for preserving it. I just wish we'd been able to do the same thing with the bandstand that Tom built. I haven't gotten to talk into building a replacement of that one yet.
Is this the stop and go light that used to be in the corner of the square?
The stop and go light, is that the one you said came from? Sure.
No, I think it was on that corner where, I think it was on the corner where Montgomery Ward was and Woolworths.
When I was a small boy, there was only one stop and go light in Oskaloosa.
Well, this one ended out in our barn, I know that.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? My hope would be that we are able to take these steps again, because we have a lot of additional artifacts, and if we don't understand how we got here, we're going to have to learn things all over again. So preserving these things is very valuable, and if somebody has an idea of somebody in the school system, or maybe at the college, that would be interested in building a display in front here, so as you could sort things, that would be something that certainly willing to support and make happen here. Let's keep it going. So I appreciate it.
Thank you all. That concludes our program, but the questers have some refreshments, and we hope you will linger to view the montage up close and ask our speakers any additional questions you might have. Thank you.
Sure.